Welcome everyone to What Really Works, Tools to Help Teachers Who Teach International Students webinar. My name is Kate Reich and I am on hand to answer any technical questions about today's webinar. We are joined today by Christopher Cosentino of the NCEA Secondary Schools Department and Gwen Cote from 3W International, a long-standing supporter of NCEA and Catholic education. Gwen has an extensive history in working with international students, as well as more than 3 decades of experience working with Catholic educators and Catholic schools. During the presentation, you may ask Gwen questions or provide comments for her by using the chat and/or question functions located in the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. To use the GoToWebinar question function, click on the question bubble, click into the blank box area, and enter your question using your keyboard, and then click Send. Please know that this webinar is being recorded, and you will all receive a copy of the final recorded webinar and presentation files that we will email to you in the coming days. Without further ado, please welcome Christopher Cosentino.
Thank you, Kate. And at this time, I would just like to thank Gwen for her taking the time to share this vital information with all of our colleagues in Catholic education. The NCEA just would like to also share with you some other professional development opportunities that we'd hope you will be able to join us for. Coming up next month in April will be our convention, which will be in Pittsburgh. We're hoping that you will be able to join us there. It's from Tuesday, April 22nd through Thursday, April 24th. If you go to the NCEA homepage, you will be able to see the link to register for the convention. Also, we have some important workshops that are coming up in the summer. The first one is the Soul of Youth Sport, which will be held from Sunday, June 15th through Tuesday, June 17th at the Miranda Center for Sport, Spirituality, and Character Development at Newman University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We also have the 2014 NCEA New Directions Stream Symposium, which will be from Sunday, June 22nd through Tuesday, June 24th, 2014 at the University of Dayton. The upcoming webinar that we have is Positive Discipline Leads to Positive Results, and that will be on Tuesday, March 4th, 2014, and we will have more information of that webinar as time permits. And at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Gwen, and thank you for participating.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Good morning or good afternoon, whichever is the case for you. I'm also very grateful for NCEA and their willingness to allow me to present and share some of what I've learned over the years. I'll preface this by saying that I've not gone to a course, and I have not, Katie, are you seeing this correctly? I'm getting a little funny screen here.
That's okay, yeah. We'll need you to go ahead and share your screen.
All righty then. Let's see if I can do that without getting an error.
There we go.
I will get myself down here and try to turn this up again.
Looks
I think
great.
We're good now. Are we?
Looks great.
Oh, perfect. In any case, what I was saying was I'm really in a position to have walked around the block a lot. And what I'm going to share with you today are really very practical, it's very practical information about what I've learned works. I didn't learn it in a course, I didn't learn it in class, and I didn't learn it in a book. I learned it by standing and watching people that could make it work. And without spending a whole lot of other time, I'll just give it a little overview of where I'm going to go with this. I want to begin with a little basic information because as you step into the world of international students or consider stepping in, you really have to take a look at what your goals are and how to structure a program so that everybody truly wins in that program. So I'm going to set everything else on that plate of how to create this as a win, this program as a win in your school. I'd like to think of this as win to the fourth power. Very often we talk about winning, we say it's win-win, like win plus win. In reality, when you're running an international program, it's really win times win, times win, times win. And if you don't have all those wins in order, you're going to end up in a bad place. The groups that have to win in an international program for it to be successful are, first of all, the school. This has to be a program that's going to speak to the mission of your school. That's a win. It has to also be a win for the international students who participate in the program. It needs to be a win for your domestic students. They cannot feel disenfranchised or left behind. And also a win for the natural family, the family that's somewhere else in this world, and they are sending and entrusting the child, their child, and the care of that child to you. Always think about this in terms of the natural family, like you were thinking about being given a great gift, or if you won the lottery, and how much you would do with that millions of dollars that you could win in the lottery. These parents are placing their child in your hands worth far more than any lottery prize. And they also, in this, need a win. And the reason I say it is that it's win times win, not win plus win, is simply because if you have a math mind, this will make sense. If you thought about bringing something to the fourth power, if any one of these groups doesn't win, so let's presume that all the wins are 5s. And we say the first win of the school is a 5. So that's 5 times a win for the international students is 5. But the domestic students have felt disenfranchised and left behind, and for them there is no win. So that's 0. So now we're going to say 5 times 5 is 25, times 0 is 0. And even if the natural family feels like it also got a win, and that's another 5, it's still 0 times 5. So everybody wins or everybody loses. And that's really, I think, how we have to stand and look at this program. When you look at the bottom of the slide and you see the triangle, the pivot point, that I believe is really our teachers. They're the ones on whom this rests. And for us as educational leaders, we have to provide them the tools to hold all those wins in balance. And you know as well as I do that the students are going to see and spend time with their teachers more than anyone else. And in that time is where they will find the win, whether that time is in a classroom, in a gymnasium, in a lunchroom, or on a trip or an activity, on a team. That's where the wins are formed. For school, or what is the win for a natural parent? It's simply a happy child, and we know that as well with our domestic kids. If we send home a happy child, we have a happy parent. And the happy child does not come from giving them everything they want, and we all know that if we've been around the block once or twice. A win for the natural parents is also the education of the United States, education for their son or daughter. It's having this piece to put in their repertoire. I'm going to speak primarily about China today because that's the group that is the most influential right now in the high school market. But for China, these students going home with a United States education, not just from high school but from college, and that really is the reason they come, for the education from college, is a true win. That is marketable in a big way in China right now. Also, it's a promise for their child of the future. It's success for the future. It's a way that they're going to make their way. When we look at the win for domestic students, that win is going to be seen in their opportunities. And if they're given a chance to use these opportunities to their fullest, and that's an opportunity to experience a different culture, side by side, sitting side by side in a class or on a field or in a gym or in a locker room, sharing experiences with one another. It gives them an opportunity to really learn compassion for others. Kids that are coming and can't understand what's going on, students that are trying to figure out why we do this in our culture, and they don't have any idea about that. It's a time for our students to learn compassion. It's a time for our students and domestic students to be able to share their faith with their students of their own age from somewhere else. And in the case of China, students who have no conception of faith or how faith can enrich or guide our lives. It is also a win because we give our students, the domestic students, a chance to have a worldview. We all, as Catholic school educators, we all say the same thing. We all say that we're going to provide students with a values-based education for the future, to make them leaders in the future. In this day and age, we can't do that unless that learning is internationally based, because our kids are not like the kids when I graduated in 1972. These students cannot go forward in their life successfully, our domestic students, without having an understanding of the international cultures and a tolerance for difference. And that's the last thing. Our kids really need to learn how to say different. And so too do those international kids. They all need to learn how to say different rather than wrong. The win for the international student is pretty simple. It's a proficiency in English, which is marketable in their own country and all around the world. It's an American education, which is considered highly prized outside of China, and there are some reasons for that, and I can't go into it because I'm time sensitive today. But the American education is highly prized for a lot of reasons. It's a chance of getting into a good American university. There are currently over 700,000 students in American universities that are international students. Almost 300,000 of those students come from China. They know they have heavy competition when it comes to applying for university. And they feel that often if they come to a high school in America, it's going to give them a shoe-in. They're going to have better English than those kids applying directly from China. They're going to have a better chance with that American diploma to get into that American university. It also is an opportunity to understand American culture. And finally, it's an opportunity for their future. These are all the wins, and we have to accomplish all of those wins to some degree in order to make our program successful. But that does rely solidly on the teacher. When you look at, it's also an opportunity, as an introduction to a faith. Let me just quickly tell you a very brief story about that. My host daughter, who's that little girl on the corner of the page on the right, she lived with me for a couple of years, and the first weekend with me, I said to her, I was her principal in the school that I was in, and I said, tomorrow's Sunday, sweetheart, you'd be ready at 9 o'clock and we will go to church. And she said what most people don't say to me at that point. She said, no. And so I said, yes. And she said, no. And I said, honey, in this family, this family's a faith family, and we go to church, so I'm going to want you to do that with me. And she said with all kinds of indignation, I am not Christian. And I said, you know what, I know that. But I'm going to go to church and worship God the way I know God to be, and I want you to go and try to figure out how to be the best person you can be. That young lady graduated from school 2 years later, and as she was going for a college interview at Cornell, and I had said to her, while I practiced for that interview with her, I said to her, sweetheart, I know you want me to go. I can't go. I have to be at school, but I will think about you every single minute you're gone. And she gave me the face that we all know that girls make. And she said, you say that you will think about me. You not say you will pray for me. Pray for me is more important. That's what the faith is about. My school, my home, but mostly that school that she spent time in every day. Those kids who witnessed and those teachers and administrators who witnessed to their faith gave her that. And it's valueless. Or priceless, I should say. I think valueless can be interpreted differently. And the win for our Catholic schools are an opportunity to fill our academic mission, as I spoke of before, an opportunity to fill our evangelical mission, as I did with that child, and our school did, with countless children, actually, over the years. And it's an opportunity on a very real way to bolster enrollment, and it is an opportunity for a financial boost that will enable furthering the school mission. However, if you are only looking for the bottom two, I encourage you not to do this, because these students who will come to you are not a commodity. These students are children. They're young people. They're people hoping for a future, and we don't have a right to make them into very little more than a commodity. So how do we do it? Now I get into the nuts and bolts. How do we really make this work, and how do we empower our teachers so they can make this work in their classrooms, which is the pivot point for all the success? Now take a look at what you're seeing on your screen. This is what an average language ability student sees when they're given an assignment. So this is a child that when you talk to them, they can, not with perfect English, but they can speak back to you. You understand what they're saying. You understand what they want. If they don't have one word, they can probably find another word to use to talk to you. this is what they would actually see. Now imagine that if a teacher gave that child an assignment and said, read this small paragraph and answer the questions at the end. There's not a chance, even with a translator, that they can do that. They are totally disempowered. Just to compare, this is what a child with good language ability would see. So you see several places in this. It's better what you see several places where they're still going to miss the heart of what's being said because they don't know all the words. This is the kind of things that the kids are actually seeing, and what we have to help our teachers see, that that's what they know, because our teachers are on a path to success. They have a curriculum, they have a project, they have a plan, and they're going to accomplish it. But if they don't understand that this is where this child is standing, who's sitting in their room, it will end up being nothing but a frustration for both of them, and we lose the win. I want to give you some general information about Chinese culture that teachers need to have as they step into a classroom, because it can significantly impact how they feel about and how they deal with a child. I'd like to say, and I'm sure you would too, that whether or not a teacher identifies with a child does not make any difference in the way they teach. It does not make any difference in terms of how much extra time they give or how compassionate they are, but we're real people, and I'm not convinced that we aren't sometimes put off by what domestic kids do or by what international kids do, and so our teachers, like all of us, will pull back. Some of the things for general information about the international students from China who are coming to you now is that they may come to you cursing, or as we say in the South, cussing. They may very well come to you with that. And I think that two things happen. Either we lose our mind when we hear them say something that is totally awful, and we go after them, or we pause and we realize that a lot of language they learn from American movies. Get the picture? That's what they're hearing. They're hearing words that are used as every single part of the English language. Nouns, verbs, adverbs, it's the same word, and it's used all the way around. They don't realize always the negativity of the word. It is not beyond them also to have learned words from other kids, and sometimes even our domestic kids who want to see what happens when they say something. The most important thing we can do when that happens really is just not lose your mind, but to help your teachers to just pull them aside and help them understand that this is a word you never say. And they will stop because they don't know for the most part. The second thing is the word for When we're thinking, we pause and we often will say, let me get that, I know the answer. And that that we say, they have a similar word in Chinese that the students say. And it sounds like this, nigga. You get why that might be a problem? I have had people call me and tell me that this child is so bigoted that they say that word all the time. It was in a school, actually, that had a very large population of minority kids, and the teachers and the administrator who called me were absolutely beside themselves because they couldn't believe that this child would be so bigoted and so blatant about it. The child wasn't. The child was saying, as they were trying to figure out the next American word, English word to say, they were saying nigga. Very different reality if you understand it. Also, they can only use the words they have, and that's true in a classroom. Our teachers can become, and rightly so if they meant it, offended by what they say. But they're only using the words they have. They have a small vocabulary, even the best of them. My best example actually comes from a host home, when a host home mom called me and said she wanted a boy out of her house that very day. And she was so upset I couldn't imagine what he had done. So I spoke to her, and she couldn't even really explain to me what he did. She was so upset. Well, we got in touch with the boy. I had a translator sit with him, and he didn't understand why she was upset. Because when she told me what he said, when he came down in the morning for breakfast, you know how to cook. You are too fat. Get a vision of how that went over. When we talked to him, What he was trying to say was that he was afraid the way she was cooking was making him fat. Could he have more? He wanted to say he wanted more other kind of food. He wanted more vegetables. But it didn't come out like that at all. So if teachers or anyone who meets these kids hear them being what could be taken as very disrespectful or rude, pause long enough not to judge it. And have the student explain to you in other words what they're trying to say. Also, contractions are very, very difficult, and we use them extraordinarily frequently. We even use them sometimes in assessments. If a child sees I''D, they don't see I would. The American kids see I would. They understand I would. These kids don't see that, and there's no way for them to look up in a translator or anywhere else what that means. As they become more fluent in English, you will find that they begin to use contractions themselves. Then you kind of know it's safe. But until you start hearing them use the contractions, they probably still won't understand them. Also, in the same line, beware of idioms and slang. They don't translate. They don't have an understandable meaning. I said to this one kid once, and the kid was not from China, but I said to this one kid once, you are driving me up the wall today. And the kid is looking at me like, and he's trying to translate what I just said. It made no sense. And he couldn't figure out how it fit at all with what was going on. They translate literally. They don't understand the idioms or the slang. And that comes very late, well after contractions in their language development. When dealing with our Chinese kids, they don't know he, she, him, or her. There's one pronoun for men and women. And for gender, if there's only one pronoun. So they don't understand those distinctions. So they could very easily say to me, Mr. Wilson, she said, or she told me, or Mrs. Skowski, he said I should. And they honestly don't understand that difference. It's important to continue to call them back to help them understand that. So not only that their speech makes sense, but also so that their writing will make sense. One thing translates into the other. Also, with our teachers and with ourselves, the speed of speaking is critical. Please don't speak to them at the speed at which I'm speaking to you. I'm trying to get through a whole lot of stuff, and I know our teachers are too, but I'm trusting that you all are understanding the English that I'm speaking. If teachers need to slow down, and I actually would contend that American students would actually understand it better too. If they slowed down, they might only have to say it once or twice instead of 3 or 4 times. It ends up taking the same amount of time. But take the time to speak slowly enough that someone who's trying to understand can hear the words, translate the words, and understand the words, and still hear the next sentence. Be very, very careful when you speak to students about when words seem contradictory when you use together. The one that I notice the most is least favorite. When we interview students here in our office for admission into schools in the United States, we will also often say to them, what's your favorite subject in school? Or what's your favorite sport? And then we pull it with, what's your least favorite? They have no idea what least favorite means. Least means lowest, favorite means highest. How do they make that make sense? They don't understand those kind of terminology. We do that a lot more than we can imagine. So I would encourage you to those are all things to help teachers be sensitive to as they teach. Other cultural differences is that race is different there from here. It's not that they come off very much like they have stereotypes and they're bigoted or they have terrible prejudice, especially against people of color. That is built in the fact that primarily everybody in China is Chinese. And their visions of what people of color, black people are and what their lives are like is very much based, again, in those movies and what they see and hear. It's not prejudice as much as it's fear. So the opportunities you can give them in the classrooms and with the teachers and in activities to share with people who are different from themselves. That's one of the greatest things we can give students who come, the plurality that we enjoy, helping them to appreciate that plurality as well. I also like to let people know that subtlety, you have to be very careful that these two I'll address together. when you ask a Chinese student a question, they are going to immediately answer you with the answer they think you want to hear. So if a teacher says to them, did you understand what we did today? And the teacher's being caring and compassionate, the child will automatically say yes. They will say yes because it's what they think the teacher wants to hear. They will say yes also because in their world, if you say no, it's like saying to a teacher, you didn't do a good enough job, so I would understand it. So I'm telling you, you didn't do it. When I say I don't understand, it's like telling you, you didn't do a good enough job. Usually you have to ask a question 3 times, and I know that's time consuming. If when you ask them the first time, did you understand, and the teacher asks that, and they say, oh, yes, and then the teacher needs to say again, you looked a little confused to me a few times. Are you sure you got the main parts of this? And the child will probably hesitate, but they will still say yes. The teacher needs to almost then, and they really need to walk the steps, because if they go to step 3 first, it won't help. The 3rd step is saying, can you tell me what you understood about this one point that I spoke about today? And then they're going to admit they don't know. But it takes that much to dig down under that culture of always giving the answer that's expected rather than giving the answer that's true. As you look at the next item, it's thank you, appreciation, and gifts. International students come off as the rudest people in some ways because they don't say thank you. I had a teacher once, his science teacher, the kids were taking anatomy, and he spent a lot of time after school with these couple girls helping them understand what they were missing and getting them on the right page. It was like over an hour. He was there almost an hour and a half with them. And when they got done, they picked up their things and they left. And he came to my office and he said, my God, I just spent all that time and they didn't even bother to thank me. I mean, they just took it for granted. In reality, they didn't. Because thank you in their culture is often seen as an insult. If they're talking, if they're dealing with people they know and appreciate, saying thank you is like saying, you didn't do well enough. What you did for me wasn't good enough. So if I heap praise on you, maybe you will do it better next time. So not saying thank you is expected. We have to expect it. Now, some of the students will say it because somebody has, especially if they come from bigger cities, they will say thank you. But if you listen, they're saying it at all kinds of times that are inappropriate. They don't really know how and when to say it. We forget that we say to our children from the time they're talking, what do you say, what do you say, what do you say? And these kids don't have that as a base. They have none of that. In fact, they have the opposite. They're going to show their appreciation by providing gifts. And when they bring a gift, it's very important that we receive the gift even if we don't want it. One of the teachers once said to me, this kid brought me a whole thing of tea, and I don't drink tea, so I told him to give it to somebody else that might appreciate it more. That's like rejecting them. Help your teachers to understand that if the children, if the kids bring anything to them, they need to receive it, and then they can give it to somebody who might appreciate it more, but they receive it graciously. They don't tip and they don't understand tipping, so if you're ever out on anything with them, teach them that, or you have even an ESL class or a culture integration class, teach them about tips and tipping because they're going to come off again as rude, but it's just because they don't do it in their country. Most Chinese students come from very wealthy families. They're coming from a place of entitlement. They want to learn to be independent. They want to learn to be able to go to an American school, but the transition's not easy. When they've always said, I want, I need, can I have, and they expect it to show up just then. So I would say that realize that they're coming from entitlement, but they want the other, and there's a rocky road in the middle, and getting from one to the other. Other things, they have absolutely no religious awareness. So coming from Catholic schools, they don't understand any of it. When we invite them into our theology classes, our theology teachers have to have a real understanding of where they come from and how little they know. That you can't really even use words like God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, apostle, disciple, miracles. They don't know, and it's something that we have to provide for them. And our religion teachers have to be especially sensitive to. The kind of accommodations we can really look at providing for the students would include some of the following. Outlines. I know as times have gone on, I've watched teachers that prepare, and they prepare differently, but all of them have something they're working from. In the old days, for those of you who may be almost as old as I am or as old as I am, we used outlines. When I started teaching, it was all about the outline. We did that little piece in the plan book, and then we prepared an outline that told us how we were going to teach that class. If you have teachers that do outlines or do something similar to an outline, I encourage them to give to the student these outlines before they present the material. Just take out the details. So if you're thinking of it as an outline, you've got the Roman numeral, then you've got the capital letter, then you have smaller letters or information underneath that. Leave all that out. Give them the Roman numeral and the A and the B. Leave space in between, and they're going to be able to follow the lesson and take notes and also be able to study more easily. That's an easy accommodation, and it doesn't take teachers a lot of time, but it's going to make an extraordinary difference in the success of the students. In much the same way, if the teacher's using PowerPoint, lots of our teachers do, if they're using a PowerPoint presentation, they should just copy their slides. Copy the slides with the white background. You know, select it so it's black and white with a white background, so the kids can write right on the slide. They're then following the teacher, and they're not going to have that difficulty of being lost, because if you don't give them anything to hold on to, they're trying to listen, decide what's important, write it down, translate it, figure it out, listen again, and they're lost. In similar ways, if you're using a smartboard and can do screenshots or can save what was done that day as a PDF and upload it to whatever your portal is for students and parents, that's a great way to give them information. If you're simply using a whiteboard, you're not lost. Have them take out their phone. They all have one. This will help your American kids too. And have them just take a picture of the whiteboard. When they come back to study, that's going to be of great assistance to them. Translations. Now, some of you come from states that provide books. Others come from states where our students have to purchase their own books. If you're in a state where the student purchases his own book, I encourage you to help them by telling them what you're going to do in advance, and encourage them to write the translations for the hard words in the chapter, right in the textbook, right over the American word, so that as they're reading, as they're following you, they're learning that word more quickly, and they're absorbing its meaning more completely. Obviously, that can't work if there's books you have to turn back in and somebody else is going to use. But if they're buying their own books, they can write in the margins and let them write in Chinese, obviously, so that as they're reading, they're connecting, and they're connecting fast, and they're able to do a better job of staying up with the class. Again, slow down. I can't say that often enough. Slow down. Teachers need to slow down. That will help their domestic kids, and it will help their international kids. Group work. This is one of my favorite things. These kids have never done group work. Their learning style is that they went in a classroom of 30, 40, 50 kids. They sat, they listened, and then they were tested and they repeated. They didn't do projects. They didn't do group work. They didn't do discussion. They never had a debate. And so we've got to teach them how to do those things because they don't know. An interesting thing happened. I was doing a training for a school in California at one point, and I said about group work, make sure you mix the groups. Don't put the international kids together. They're going to flounder. Mix them in your other groups and help the other American kids to help them, because that's going to really also help the American kids learn if they have to explain. And this cute little science teacher got up and she said, I tried that. I did it for the whole first section, but they came and they told me they hated it. They wanted to work together in a group, so I've been putting them together since then. I thought, sweetheart, who's the teacher? And you have to help your teachers know that too. It doesn't matter what the kids ask for. The teacher knows what's best as a teaching tool. You know what's best. Don't let them manipulate you, because they want to go to the easiest route just like your other kids do. And don't let them go there. Insist you're the teacher. You know what they want. You know what's best for their learning. and insist that it's done the way you know is best. Also a buddy system, I've been told in many schools that this works, and that's pairing up an international student with one of your great other kids. You know, we all have great kids in our schools, and matching that child up with somebody in the classroom who's just a super great kid, and telling the student to always go to their buddy first. If they have a question, if they don't know the answer, and alert the buddy that when there's an assignment due, when there's a project due, when there's going to be a test, when they've been given a direction for something else, that they check in with their buddy to make sure that the buddy understands, and the buddy then knows exactly who to go to. It starts to build relationship. It starts to build understanding. It starts to build the wins. And that's really going to help in the classroom. Timing for assessments and assignments. We have to change the timing. They can't do the whole test the way the other kids can do it, especially when they first arrive. I would encourage you to break up, or encourage your teachers to break up the test into sections. So if they have a multiple choice section, a short answer section, and an essay, that they give the students the multiple choice in class. They will probably finish that at about the same time everybody else finishes everything. Then have them come back to do short answer, and then maybe allow them to take the essay home in the beginning. Then, of course, if you use Turnitin, it's a great resource, and if you don't, check into it, because then you can be sure you're not getting what they looked up somewhere and wrote down as that essay. You'll know the amount of plagiarism that exists. Speaking of that kind of assessments, when you're giving multiple choice, or your teachers are giving, I'm saying you and I mean your teachers, when the teachers are giving multiple choice, they should be instructed to not give the students the throwaway answer. Normally we have 4 answers. One's an absolute throwaway. One is an almost throwaway, and 2 are contenders. Give them the 3 others. Take out the throwaway. They don't need to spend the time translating that, figuring out what it means, and taking time away from what really matters. You can leave the third almost throwaway in, but make it smaller choices. And if you do those things, if your teachers have those questions are like A and B but not C, C and D but not A and B, I mean, oh please, there's no way they can handle that in the beginning. Let me keep going here. And this also, I think, would really, hear me saying, just imagine if I was saying nigga. Extra help versus enrichment. We always say, teachers say to kids, come for extra help. You're failing. You need to come for extra help after school. I'm having an extra help session on Thursday. I need you to be there. What you're saying to an American kid or an international kid is essentially, you're a loser. You don't get it. You need help. You failed. I think it would be a wonderful thing if all our students and our teachers started hearing the words, I'm having enrichment and you would really benefit from that. I really want you at the enrichment class because I think it's going to give you some more strength to what you know. I know the kids are going to look at that cynically, so, you know, I'm aware of that in the beginning. But anything that our teachers do and we believe, and if we really believe it's for enrichment, then our students will start to believe it too. It may take the full 4 years to get the freshmen to seniors, but it'll happen. It'll happen if we allow it to. Mix and mingle. Again, if your teachers have not done a seating chart in years, have them start. Don't let the international kids sit together. Get them mixed up in the group so that when they have to ask a question of their neighbor or they need instruction, and help your domestic students know that they can do that. That if the child can't find the page because they don't remember, they couldn't understand what page you said, that they can reach over and help the child find the page. But that doesn't have to be another international student. Sometimes that becomes the blind leading the blind. You really want to have the mix and mingle happening there. Vocabulary lists or word banks. Those are exceptionally helpful, especially if you give them to the child ahead of the assessment, ahead of doing the chapter, especially if you're starting the new chapter on Monday and you give it to them on Thursday or Friday of the week before so they can look up those words and start finding them in the text and getting that meaning really beat down inside themselves so that when you start using those words, they know what you're saying. They can get the deeper meanings the teacher's giving them. They can get the application. But if they're struggling with the word, if you're saying, if in a science class the teacher's using the word myocardial, just imagine that child trying to figure out what are we talking about, and then we're going to try to develop that thought in that class, in that lesson. It's awfully difficult. Classics, in the English classes, I don't know, I wasn't an English person, I was a math person, but in English class I struggled through Shakespeare. I really did, and we teach Shakespeare all the time. Imagine trying to understand Old English when you speak Chinese and you don't speak English well yet. It's very, very difficult. I encourage the teachers to let the students, or encourage the students even, to buy the work in Chinese. If it's a classic, it's available. It's also, Bibles are also available in both languages. But if they read the piece in their own language, they still have to participate in class, hear the discussion, take the assessments, all in English. So as a result, they do understand it, and they are able to explain it, and it's not a giveaway, but it's assisting them with the part that is the most difficult. They still have to interpret the work, and they still have to function in English, but it gives them that little bit of a start. Advanced everything. The more that we can give our students in advance, the better they will be. The more we are able to push them to look ahead so that they don't always feel like they're catching up, but they feel like they've got a handle on it, so that when it gets deeper, then they know there's something there to build on. There's a foundation that they've been able to grasp. So whether it's the outline, the slides, it's the translation, it's any of these pieces, the word banks, any of those pieces. Please give it to them as early as the teacher can, because if it's coming in on a sheet as a teacher walks in the door, they're still going to be playing catch up the whole time. I think you see from the slides, from these accommodations though, that none of them are high intensity. They're not something that's going to take a teacher an extra hour every night to prepare. They're things that could be prepared quite easily. But I think the teachers and the school and the student, most importantly, will see success much faster. We all know as educators that success breeds success. We have to give students that little modicum of success in order for them to grab the next piece. If they're always losing, then it's easier to put my head down because I'm going to lose anyway. If I'm never going to get it, if I'm always failing, why not just put my head down and fail? We've got to find a way in every room for that teacher to give the child success as a lifeline so they can grab the next one and the next one and the next one until they're truly on the page. My last comments are very simple. Oh, I'm sorry, I had a couple more here. Group work, that's that same thing about mixing them. I said it twice. Translators, a lot of people don't want to use translators. I let them use translators for everything when they first came because, and teachers say to me, and they're right, they can save stuff on their translator and they can use it to cheat rather than using it to, for just translating. Every translator, no matter how expensive it is, has a reset button. It's right near the power button. It's an invented button. It takes 4 seconds to reset a translator. I used to have the teachers, have the students put their translator on the corner of the desk. When the tests are being passed out, the teacher just went to the international kids and pushed in those buttons and double-checked that everything was cleared. Then they were only able to use it as a translator. So those are the kind of accommodations I would really recommend to you. There was something else that was in my head that I wanted to say, and it's gone. Maybe it'll come back. We need to, in ourselves, and we need to help our teachers avoid our own kind of stereotyping of our international students, especially Asian international students, because we somehow have a picture in our head that all Asian students work hard. All Asian students want to succeed. All Asian students do exactly what they're told when they're told to do it. They all work ceaselessly to get the very best grade. Guess what? That's a stereotype, and it's not accurate. Yes, those kids exist, just like they exist among our American kids. So too do the kids that fool around, even the ones that fool around because it's easier than feeling like they're going to fail, as are the ones that you have to kind of pull teeth to get them to do their homework or get them to do the assignment. Those kids exist in every culture. They exist among our Asian kids, and we do them a disservice if we're not always fighting our own stereotypes and that our teachers aren't fighting theirs to see that kids are kids. I've dealt with kids. In 1992, we couldn't get an Asian kid to come to our school for anything. My teachers used to say, oh, please, would you just get me an Asian? I have enough of these former Soviet bloc kids. They all came from the former Soviet bloc. Later, they all came from Spain. At one point, they all came from South America. At another point during these 20 years, they came from Korea and then Vietnam, and then China hit the market. So it moves, and this population, while it will probably never go away, it will move. I have about 15 minutes for questions, so I'm going to tell you just one other thing, and that's why does the Chinese government send so many kids to the United States? That's a common question. And its answer makes absolute sense. We all know that everything we pick up says made in China. China is a producer for the world. They don't want to always be the producer. They want to be the inventor, the creator. They don't want to make iPhones. They want to create the technology that built that iPhone. But their education system, as it is today, does not allow for that kind of thinking. They know that. So while they are really, as a whole country, looking at that education system and what to do and how to change it, they are sending their kids away so they can import that kind of education. The other thing that I really just rethought of, it's totally out of order, but I think it's important for you to know. Chinese kids do not understand plagiarism. They do not get it. So you really have to help them understand what plagiarism means. In their real life, they have always been taught, if they find it and they write it down themselves on their own paper, even word for word, that because they found it, it's okay to make it theirs. We need to really work hard with that and help them understand how significant plagiarizing can be, both in your school and as they go forward into university, where they could very well be dismissed for it. It's an obligation we have. It's not good enough to just say, this is copied, you get a 0. They don't get it. We need to help them get it. I think, actually, that's all I have. You have my contact information there and another picture of my host daughter with me on the bottom. That was after her graduation. But I'm open to questions if you have any.
Hi, Gwen. This is Kate. We got a question which says, is there ever a time that Chinese students should be made to speak only English? They all speak Chinese most of the time. So what would your response be?
And I'm sorry, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't address that. That's absolutely essential. I used to make school a no Chinese zone. So I would bend. If we live in Florida, so they all eat outside and they eat in small groups in different places. So I would bend at lunchtime if they were speaking to one another. But our rule always was, if there's one English-speaking person in the area where you are and they don't understand Chinese, you must speak English. It is rude to speak Chinese. That you have to demand, and you have to demand from the very beginning. I am not saying they can never speak in Chinese, because when I was in China, I have to tell you, I went to the dining room, and if I saw anybody or heard anybody speaking English, I was like Velcro, sticking to them, because I was so tired of being interpreted for. So yes, you really have to identify zones. They certainly should never be using Chinese in a public area where there are people that don't understand them.
Okay. And then earlier you said that U.S. education is highly prized. Can you take a few minutes maybe to share an overview of why that is, what the perspectives are?
The interesting thing is when we look at those worldwide statistics and we see that we're down at number 12 or whatever we're at on those worldwide statistics, we always take that as a put down or a failure. But we're not always dealing in apples and apples. So just for the same reason that I just indicated that China really wants to import our education, they come up higher on that list than we do, but it's because their kids can repeat, not because they can creatively think. When we look at standards-based education, that's what it's about. It's being able to take information from more than one place and apply it. That's why our education is prized. When they go home, they're seen as critical thinkers within American education. So it's something we really do have to give.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. This goes back to the question about creating groups or Chinese-only speaking zones. The reference says that we have a case where they opt to sit together for lunch. We encourage them to mix, but they do not do it on their own. How much should we push?
It would be my take that you should push pretty hard after. I would let them sit together for the first couple of weeks, but you know that will get broken down on its own if you are helping your American kids and the international kids and your classroom teachers to integrate in the classroom. If that child has a buddy in science class and that buddy says, hey, come join us for lunch, we want to hear about what you used to do in your school, that child's going to go. And they're going to start to make those relationships that make them say, hey, I want to sit with those guys. Or these kids are on my track team. I want to sit with these guys. But somebody's got to invite them to that track team first. And when they're on that track team, they're never going to speak Chinese because they're going to be the only one that does speak it. So it's going to improve their language. It's also going to develop their peer group. So I would say after that first 2 weeks, and I'm not saying they can never sit next to each other. Mm-hmm. Certainly I didn't hold the reins that tightly when I was in school, but I did push them that at least 2 or 3 times a week they had to sit somewhere else. And then the work is really with the American kids because their table's already full and they're not necessarily going to invite that kid. And when that kid comes, the kid just sits there silent. And I asked one of the kids why that happened, and they said to me, because they asked me questions. And I said, well, why don't you just answer their questions? And she said to me, I try. But they asked me the question, but by the time I figure out the answer, they're talking to someone else. Hmm. So that child has heard the question. She's interpreted it from English to Chinese. She's figured out the answer in Chinese. She's figured out now how to say it in English. And you know our kids, they're on to 3 different topics by then. So some of it is really educating our domestic students as well as our international students. The domestic students to be that compassionate presence, that welcoming presence that we pride ourselves on. As faith-based schools, we say that that's what we do, that we live the gospel. Well, if we do, then we need to walk it, not just talk it. And so do our kids.
Okay. We have one last question. It says, we have a number of students that have been skipping class. Have you dealt with this before, and how did you go about fixing it?
Okay. They do skip class, and part of that, again, is, as I said, in their system, it doesn't really matter if they go or they don't go. It's not an issue. If they can pass the test, then it doesn't matter whether they were in the class. So some of their families will just get them private tutors. They go to school when they want a little social interaction, and other than that, they stay home. You absolutely have to have them understand that that attendance is essential. Whoever it is or whatever your contact is with their families, that has to be a constant contact with their family. So whether you do that through whatever company or partner you're using or you have a direct connection, you need to be able to be saying to that parent, your child skipped school today. The punishment is that they will have whatever number of hours of extra work after school, and if they get zeros for every day, and this will impact their grades and their averages. So please help them understand that we don't do that. And then as you ratchet up that discipline, so that at some point you're saying you have skipped class 10 times. if you are not in school and you are not ill, you will now risk expulsion, or first suspension and then expulsion. And I would hold to that, because they have to learn the rules of a different system.
Mm-hmm. Actually, another question came in. This is probably both domestic and international students, but how do you keep them off of their phones?
One of the things I would say to you is they should never take it out unless you're letting them take a picture of the board. So keep them put away. Yeah. Do not allow them to use their phone or as their translator. Because get the picture. You and I both know. I mean, we've sat in enough meetings where we've picked up our phone and answered more than one email and more than one text. Mm-hmm. But they're sitting in a classroom. They have to understand what's going on. They're tired. They don't know what page they should be on anyway. And they pick up that phone, and you think, oh, they must be translating something. They're not. They're texting. They're sending back an email message. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to keep aware of that. So first of all, don't let them use their phone anytime in class. And I think we also have to help the host family with the whole technology thing. So host families, I always recommend that they set an end time for internet. So internet gets turned off at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. And if they have to physically turn it off in their house, turn their modem off, and have the modem in their room and turn it off, then do it. Because in their country also, internet is very limited. So this is like a kid in a candy store. They got this internet, and they can go on Facebook, and they can do all these things, whatever they want. And it really is like, oh, yippee-doo, and they can't put it down. And if they weren't addicted before they came, my gosh, they are after they do.
Mm-hmm. So, in the event where they have a translator with them, do you have any thoughts or resources about implementing a translator policy, especially if most translators are programmable and they have storage capabilities? Something that'll keep them, on the translator and not on all the other.
Right. The only recommendation I have is the one I made before, and that is, if they're in class and they're looking at something that they looked up before and they've stored it on their translator, that's no problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're on target and they saved something because they thought it might be important. That's okay. They're reinforcing learning. But if it's an assessment of any kind, whether that's a quiz, you might just say we don't use translators on quizzes. But if it's a major assessment, I would say hit those buttons and reset, because it totally resets every single translator on the market.
Okay. Some folks have some questions about the social aspect, of the students being with the host families. And what I'm going to do, we need to wrap up in interest of time, is certainly invite anybody to contact you directly, Gwen, by email or by phone for some of these follow-up questions. Yep. Okay.
And you'll see both my number and my email address on the screen. Please don't hesitate to contact me about any question that you come up with as a result of today's conference. I'm more than happy to share anything I've kind of come across over the years.
Okay, great.